Okay, it's a pleasure to be here once again. I want to thank Rabbi Guppin for inviting me to talk tonight. I apologize for not having enough copies. I underestimated, I guess, the attendance for this evening. That's my fault. But I'm pretty confident that for the text we're going to be learning tonight, the people that don't have I think the people that don't have the text will actually be familiar with what we'll be learning. So with your very stellar Jewish education, I'm pretty confident everybody will be able to follow. Okay. So we're going to learn a text inside. I want to give a little bit of a brief background beforehand. So the advertisement, if you will, for the class was tracing the history of the Second Temple period of the Beis HaMikdash up to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes, but I want to zero in on just the last little bit of that time frame. So in a nutshell, generally speaking, the difference between the first temple period and the second temple period was that in the first temple period, the Jewish people were pretty much in control of themselves, starting from King David or King Saul, King David, King Solomon, and then split into the two kingdoms that came after. They were pretty much in control of their own destiny to a certain. They had little incursions from other kings and the Philistines and whatnot, but pretty much they were in control of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, during that time period. In the second temple time period, that was not the case at all. Pretty much from the get-go, they had to get permission from the king of Persia, where they were, of Koresh. Lots of starts and fits until they actually were able to gather up a mass of people to go, then get permission, and then permission withdrawn, and then permission given again until they were actually able to go and build the second Beis HaMikdash, the second temple. And then even within that time, they were under the dominion of the kings that were in charge of the land of Israel. So they were at the mercy, if you will, of the different kings ruling at the time. Whoever was the ruler of that area of the Middle East at the time, that's who they had to pay their taxes to or acknowledge the sovereignty over the land of Israel. Okay, that changed, obviously, everybody here knows, with the story of Hanukkah. What's the big deal about Hanukkah? It got too much for the Jewish people to live under the domain of the Syrian Greeks. They threw off the yoke with the heroic story of the Maccabees and God aiding the small band of warriors against the massive Syrian Greek armies, and they overturned that, and they were, for that period of time, they were the sole people in control of the land of Israel. So that harkened back to the previous time to a degree. Okay, so we had the five sons of Matisyahu, and they took turns being in control of the Jewish people. Okay, so we have all the way up to the last son. The last son that survived was Shimon. Shimon was the ruler of the Jewish people, and this is very important. Okay, so the problem with saying ruler is that he wasn't really the ruler of the Jewish people per se as a king. Why? Is because there is a law. The law states that from when King David became the king of Israel, there can be no other ruler of the Jewish people that is not from the tribe of Judah, of Yehuda. Okay, so the thing is Matisyahu, we all know, was a Kohen, was a priest, or the high priest. So obviously his children are also priests, Kohanim. So that means even though they led a revolt against the Antiochus and the Syrian Greek Empire, nevertheless, they could not crown themselves as king. So they were the spiritual leaders and the de facto also physical leader, but without assuming the throne of the Jewish people. Okay, that's a very important distinction. So that dynasty of the Hashmonaim, the Hasmonean dynasty, lasted about a little bit of 100 years from the end of Shimon. Okay, so from Shimon to the end was his children, or there was one of his children's grandchildren's wives. Famous Shlomis was a very, very wise queen. She ruled over for a period of 9 years. That was one after another. Then after she died, there was a civil war to a degree between two of her sons, and each one wanted the kingdom. And during that time, they had assumed, this was part of the problem of the decline, is that they had actually assumed the throne. One of the grandchildren of Shimon assumed the throne and called himself king. A little bit of a problem there already. But anyway, once the queen died, of a few generations later, her two children fought over, and one of them decided, let me. This was really the beginning of the end. Let me invite the Roman ruler who lives in the country nearby, and we'll invite him to arbitrate this dispute. Now, once you're going to invite an outside influence into the land of Israel, he's not going to just come and pick a side and leave. No, he's going to get involved and he's going to stay. And that was the beginning of the Roman rulership or involvement in the land of Israel from that period up until the destruction. And then it was really downhill from there, one after another. Then we had a lot of episodes of rivalry, of warfare within the Jewish people and the Romans against the Jewish people. And that pretty much led to the very end, about 200 years after the story of Hanukkah, led to the end of the temple. Okay, so we had 100 years from when Shimon was in charge, and the Hashmonaim. After a certain part, the Hashmonaim were totally wiped out by one of the Roman influenced governors or kings. And then it was just random governors in charge appointed by the Romans. And that eventually led to the destruction of the temple, one thing after another. Okay, so that's a little bit of the background of the history of the Second Temple period, of how that came to be. Now I want to zero into right before the temple was destroyed, kind of the last episode of what happened before, which really brought in the final onslaught of the destruction of the Second Temple, which is the period we are in now. Okay, so you have over here a source sheet. It's really only two sources. It's two pieces of the Talmud from two different tractates. The first one is the tractate of Yoma, which discusses, generally speaking, all about the laws of Yom Kippur. So it says like this. It's discussing the differences between the First Temple period and the Second Temple period. And the First Temple period, he discusses what's the reason why the First Temple period was destroyed. So he brings a list of 3 reasons of what the Jews weren't doing correctly, of why the First Temple was destroyed. But so in the Second Temple, the Talmud asks the question, and this is where we're going to start the class now in the first text you have over here. The Talmud wants to know, why was the Second Temple destroyed? In other words, obviously there was a physical manifestation, there was the kings, there was the rulers, there was the Romans, etc. But there had to have been a spiritual consequence that made possible that there should be the physical consequence, right? Nothing happens in a vacuum. Whatever happens over here is only because of consequence of the spiritual realms. What happened spiritually to the Jewish people? They weren't keeping their part of the bargain that allowed for the material and physical consequences of the Beis HaMikdash to be destroyed. So explains, the Talmud says, because there was baseless hatred. That's what the Talmud says. And it tells you like this. The Lamedcha, and this teaches us that baseless hatred is equivalent to the 3 of the most severe avedas, of the most severe sins of idol worship, of idolatry, and of murder. Which those 3 sins of idolatry, serving idols, and murder is the cause of the destruction of the first temple. And it's telling us the Second Temple, we didn't have those things, but we had something just as bad. What was just as bad in the Second Temple that caused the destruction? That was baseless hatred. That is text number 1. That is the spiritual consequence that led to the physical destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Text 1. Any questions? Okay.
My question was, can you say something more about it? Like if you created 3 sins?
The short answer is no. No, the short answer is no. I can't explain at this moment. Over there, the Gemara goes into greater depth and detail, trying to understand how this was possible. That's what I say now. But I'm pretty confident that if you were to look at the commentaries on that Gemara over there, it would go into detail on how that works out to be. Yes.
Just a question. With Tisha B'Av is also commemorating or dealing with the destruction of the first temple as well as the second.
That's correct.
That's why, yeah, my chair wasn't.
Okay, so this is something I thought about when preparing this class, is that most of the time in this period, the first temple gets short shrift in explaining it. And I think there's a couple of reasons. It's because the 3-week period The specific 3-week period, to my understanding, only really happened in the second temple period. So this 3-week is really a second period sense of mourning. And the actual destruction happened both in the same day, but the lead up of what we're doing right now, the 3-week period is exclusive to the second temple. Okay, good. Yes.
Very quick, so you were saying that like the kings came from Matthias and the Maccabees?
Yeah.
So is King Herod of the same line?
Okay, so this is a good question. King Herod was not. King Herod was very questionable, his Jewish lineage to begin with. And that was from a mistake from a previous Hasmonean king. But he wanted that there should be no questions about him. So what he did was, he was the one that actually wiped out the whole entire Hasmonean dynasty, killed every single one of them, except for one woman who he wanted to marry. And she did not let that happen. She killed herself instead of having to marry him. So that's how that dynasty ended. Good question. Okay, now we're going to the second text, and this is the main text we're discussing tonight. But I want to preface like this: there's an occupational hazard to learning Talmud. Okay, what's the occupational hazard? Is that when we learn Talmud briefly and we learn it, we get a kind of a good picture from, let's say, 20,000 feet. So we see the forest. That's fine because you kind of see the general picture. But the hazard becomes is when you start going and start looking at the individual trees of, what does this line mean? What does this commentary say? And then when we go too analytical and too in depth, there's a risk. That risk is we might lose the forest. So we get lost, stranded, looking at individual trees that we don't know where we came from, and we can't find our way out. That's an occupational hazard. So what I want to do with the next text, because this is the most important we're going to discuss tonight, is we're going to look at the forest. We're going to go through the text rather briefly, look at the forest, and then we're going to pick apart some trees within the forest, and then we're going to go back and kind of see the forest again, so we make sure that we're all going to be on the same page here, okay? And at the very least, what we're going to do is I want you, after we look at the forest the first time, I want you to tie a rope around yourselves, obviously figuratively, so you know exactly where you came from. And I'll help you, I'll guide you through this, but I just want to let you know this is going to be the roadmap of kind of the way we're going to learn this next piece, okay? The next piece is rather famous. And I'm linking the first text, the second text, because a lot of commentaries say, to bring an example of what baseless hatred brought about the destruction of the second temple, this is the example. This is the description of what the Talmud wants to bring of an example of baseless hatred which brought about the destruction of the second temple. Okay, so let's go over here. We're going to skip the first few lines, and we are going to go to discuss what it says over here. It's going to be, we're going to do from the English. I'm going to do from the English. I guess we're most comfortable there. I'm going to start from like this. It's going to be in the middle of this page where it says the Gemara. So the last 2 lines is the Gemara over here. That's where we're going to go, and we're going to go. Here we go. The Gemara explains Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. Here we go. You're going to have to keep pay attention to the names over here. So we have 2 people right now. We have Kamsa, Bar Kamsa. Apparently, they did something so terrible that Jerusalem was destroyed because of them. So here we go. What was the story? There was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa and his enemy was named Bar Kamsa. So we brought a third individual. Okay, we have a person who's nameless. He has an enemy, Bar Kamsa, friend Kamsa. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, "Go bring me my friend Kamsa." The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy Bar Kamsa. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamsa sitting at the feast. Okay, so we have nameless host and we have enemy Bar Kamsa at the feast. Kamsa was mistakenly not invited, apparently, by a misunderstanding of the servant. I'm going to insert here a little bit of a comedic joke. Not joke, but it's a true story, actually. There's a commentator, it's a contemporary rabbi who lives in Israel, and he's very, very famous, very popular. And someone asked him a question. It was a cantor who was hired by a synagogue, but there was on the phone, the cantor heard he was hired for a synagogue in Elad, which is a town in Israel. But really what he had heard, what was said to him on the phone was that we want you to come to our synagogue in Eilat. Okay, and Elad and Eilat are a number of hours away from each other. So they went to this rabbi over here to decide who had to pay who, because he went to the wrong place and he still wanted to get paid. Well, it's not my fault, etc. So the rabbi over there brought this piece of Talmud and said, bottom line is, for the future, at the very least, you need to know be very clear when you communicate, so you know who Kamsa is, who Bar Kamsa is, where Eilat is, where Eilat is, so don't make those mistakes. Okay, let's continue. So he found Bar Kamsa sitting at the feast. The host said to Bar Kamsa, that man is the enemy of that man. That is, to explain, you are my enemy. So he used a weird way of saying that. But basically, he's telling him, you're my enemy. Why? What then do you want here? Arise and leave. Get out of here. You're my enemy. What do you think you're doing here? Leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, since I've already come, let me stay, and I will give you money for whatever I eat and drink. I'll pay my fare. Just do not embarrass me by sending me out. Go to the next page now. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, I will give you money for half of the feast. Just do not send me away. Obviously, this is this is an embarrassing episode unfolding in front of us right now. This person, it seems to be publicly, to some degree, is being asked to leave. So he pleads, I'll give you whatever I eat. No. I'll give you half of my meal. No. I'll give you half of the whole entire meal. No. Then Bar Kamsa said to him, I'll give you money for the entire feast, just let me stay. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Okay, so we have a standoff over here. What happens? Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. So apparently there was a little bit of an altercation, there was a scene, and he threw him out. After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they are content with what he did. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. Okay, so we have a serious escalation that happened over here. So we had a fight of two people that all of a sudden got carried to the sages, that all of a sudden got carried to the whole entire Jewish people now. So this is what happens. He went to the emperor. He's so filled with rage. He's blind with rage. He goes to the emperor and says, the Jews have rebelled against you. The emperor said to him, who says that this is the case? So Bar Kamsa said to him, go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government and see whether they will sacrifice it. The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. Okay, so this in itself is fine. Non-Jewish governments were, if they wanted to send a sacrifice on the temple, and they wanted to send it via a messenger, that was not a problem. As long as it was unblemished, it was as if it was just as good as we would have unblemished animal that we would have sacrificed. For the peace of the king, we would not have refused him, we would have accepted it. Okay, so what happened? What's wrong with that? Let's continue. While Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. And some say he made a blemish on its eyelids. A place, okay, and this is very important now, a place where according to us, which means halacha, Jewish law, it is a blemish. But according to them, Gentile rules for their offerings, it is not a blemish. So this is where Bar Kamsa went and split the difference. To us, the Jewish people, he knew we need something that is completely unblemished, no problems on the eyelids, no problems on the lips, nothing else. But from a non-Jewish perspective, what could be wrong with that? A small little blemish, that should be just fine. So therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priest would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished. But they also could not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities who did not consider it to be a blemish. They thought that if they went, and this is debated among the commentaries how this happened, but if they went to explain why they couldn't, their explanation would not be accepted by the Romans. It would make matters worse. So they're in a very tough bind. So the blemish notwithstanding, we have a very big issue. The sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. It's really they thought it's life and death. If we decline and say we're not going to do it, they're going to take this as an act of rebellion. So therefore, our lives are at stake. We got to do it. So there was another rabbi there. Rabbi Shechtman said to them, if the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. What happens in a case where we're not under threat? People might take an example from what's going on now. They won't be able to understand the scenario of what we're in now, and they'll make a scenario a couple of years later. Hopefully, everything will be fine, and they'll say, there's no problem offering blemish sacrifices on the altar. We did it back then. We should do it now too. So, for fear of that, this sage, Rabbi Zechariah, said we shouldn't do it. Okay, so they came up with a plan B. The sages said if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. So how are we going to make this problem go away? Here we go. The sages thought to kill him so that he would not go and speak against them. Okay, so what are we going to do? It's our lives versus this person's life. So and we know we have a principle in Jewish law that if somebody comes to kill you, you're allowed to strike first. So this is what they said over here. he's obviously has the consequences that will be killed. So we're able to forestall our mass murder by the Roman emperor by taking care of him and making sure he goes away by killing him. So Beis HaBechirah said to them, again, a similar concern. If you kill him, people will say the one who makes a blemish on the sacrificial animals is to be killed. So people are not going to be able to send the circumstance. They're going to say, look, all they're going to be able to say is what they thought they saw is somebody made a blemish and all of a sudden he's killed. They're not going to be able to put two and two together or see the inner intrigue, and big disaster will result. So as a result, it did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently the war between the Jews and the Romans began. And that is the final chapter, the final blow, and the Talmud consequently details in vivid imagery exactly how the final blows came to be. And to conclude this section, Rabbi Yochanan says, the excessive humility of Rabbi Tzachai ben Avakos destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. So he's lamenting that this sage of Zechariah, because of his humility, excessive humility, and didn't let the sages do what they thought was necessary at the time, because of this, he had somewhat of a connection to the temple being destroyed and the exile that later ensued. Okay, that is the Talmud. This is an example of what the commentaries want to say is the connection to the first text. This is baseless hatred, and look what it led to. It led to the destruction of the second temple. Okay, so I'm going to present you the forest. The forest is, if you're going to walk away from this right now, the forest is an example here of how baseless hatred causes destruction, in specific, destruction of the second temple. That is all you need to know from this class. I, as a teacher, would be extremely happy if you were to walk away and someone were to ask you, what did you learn? You're going to say in one sentence, confidently, that the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. That is the forest right now. Any questions before we start going to the trees? Yes?
Basically, hatred, but it was one person who was angry, right?
Okay, so you're saying something fantastic, and I'm gonna carry this through in my first tree that we're gonna visit.
What was the halacha? The right or wrong?
Is who right or wrong?
We're saying it's because of his humility that it's happening. It sounds like he was a rabbi.
Okay. So there's this.
Like Rabbi Yochanan is a little upset that he made that call.
Good. So Rabbi Yochanan definitely sounds that he's lamenting the fact that this sage, because of his excessive humility, did this. And so that's a good tree you picked out from the forest. I'll say the commentaries really struggle with this, as they struggle with the previous, where it says Bar Kamsa was thrown out, and he got upset at the rabbis for sitting there and not protesting. A lot of commentaries struggle with what were the rabbis doing there? Why didn't they say anything? So those are two trees that are there, and it goes different ways. Some say, yeah, the rabbi should have set up. Some say, no, there's a complete misunderstanding. And the majority, in specific for Rabbi Zechariah, the majority of authorities go with the literal interpretation that it was a humility that shouldn't have happened.
Sounds like he was about the first.
Okay, so we know very little about him. We have maybe two other references in the whole entire Talmud of this person, Rabbi Zechariah. Apparently, he was. A lot of people say that he was actually the leader of the Sanhedrin, the leader of the 71 sages. No, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avakos. He's the head of the Sanhedrin. So he was actually he was actually the leader, if you will, of the Jewish people that presents a problem. So I'm going to leave that for now, and if we get to we'll hit that tree and we'll color that. Okay.
We need to go and look at this blemish a little bit closer. Take the animal in another room, quickly go and get a substitute.
Okay.
In other words.
So there is a few commentaries that go through different scenarios of why they didn't do exactly like that, and they go and explain why every single one wouldn't have worked out. And I think the gist is Bar Kamsa was no fool. He was very smart. He knew exactly what he was doing. So very unlikely that he would have let this go without him, paying astute attention to see what's going on.
Yeah, but he's not a Kohen. He couldn't have gone right into the Beis HaMikdash or whatever.
Yeah.
Gone
So
to one of the chambers. And,
yeah. So it's possible, but at that time, you didn't because of the bribery and whatnot. There were people that weren't priests still doing, hanging around in places they shouldn't have been hanging out. So even then, unlikely that he wouldn't have been. But this is a matter of consternation for some of the version of the commentaries. Okay, we're gonna start like this. The first thing we're gonna dwell upon. We're gonna ask two questions. First question is, what's your first name?
David,
What David asked. David asked is like this. I'm going to paraphrase your question. Is that we're saying here in the first text, we're saying that the second temple was destroyed of baseless hatred, and commentaries point to the second text of this whole story of two individuals that led to that. So, kind of, why should this is the question that is asked? Why should a story of just two individuals, yes, between two people, lead to the consequences of the whole entire Jewish people? If it's the whole entire Jewish people having baseless hatred for themselves, okay, we understand. There's strife, there's civil war. Okay, that makes sense. But because of one incident, that should lead to the whole entire situation. That's question number one we're going to ask. Question number two we're going to ask is, the beginning of the story says is that Jerusalem was destroyed because of Bar Kamsa and Kamsa. Now, I'm going to ask the esteemed assembly here, who can tell me what was Kamsa's fault in this? So Kamsa was the guy who was thrown out of the party. He was thrown out by an unnamed guy who was the host. And nevertheless, we have the Talmud telling us that Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What was Kamsa's fault? He was just the poor guy sitting at home.
Not divided you.
Wasn't even invited. On a side note, there are some commentaries that say that this was the problem, is that Kamsa's friend was throwing a party and he waited for invitation. To a friend's party, you don't wait for invitation, you go. Because he waited for invitation, that was his problem. That's what some people say. But that's more of a, people go back and forth to that one. But what was his problem? Yes.
so I'm gonna say is that he wasn't the problem, but I also want to bring up, it reminds me of Jacob and Esau. Because what did Esau do? But he was the problem.
Okay.
I don't want to get into that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a tree from a different forest. So we're leaving it alone for now. So your answer to the question of what did Kamsa do is,
Nothing.
Are you-
He's not at fault, but.
so then what's the Talmud saying? That because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. Obviously, there seems to be.
What's his name?
I mean, the story.
So why didn't it say, so why didn't the Talmud then say, because of the unnamed host and Bar Kamsa, it was the Jerusalem was destroyed? That's a more accurate description of what happened.
You think it's just one-
Okay. Commentaries absolutely say that. They put part of the onus, like it's your friend, you should go, you should figure out what's going on. Yeah, that's part of it. Yes, that's a potential answer.
What does it?
It's some of the same thing. Your friend makes a party, you have to go and see why am I not invited?
Why?
What's gonna help the situation?
Because then it would have helped in two ways. Number one is that he wouldn't have to send a messenger looking for to make a mistake. There would be no messenger going out. Kamsa would show up. Oh, is there a party? I'm invited. Oh, yeah, you are. Fine. So Bar Kamsa is not going to come. So we don't have that problem. The other thing is that if Bar Kamsa would have come and saw Kamsa sitting there, he would have put two and two together and figured it out. Now, at the very least, Bar Kamsa is coming. He doesn't see Kamsa there. He thinks maybe the host wants to make up with me. So that's why he's inviting me. I see Kamsa's not there, so it must be just a one-on-one situation. A lot of Mepharshim go back and they go, yes, David,
Yeah,
round two.
Thompson was actually really hurt, and that's why he didn't go to the party and ask, why didn't you invite me? And that's why he's at fault, because he should have went to the party. and
Okay,
asked.
okay.
He's too early.
Also good.
I feel like the host should have a name.
Yeah.
Okay,
Played such a large role. How
So,
come he doesn't have a name?
we're gonna answer this question right now. So we're gonna bring the first person we're gonna bring here. I didn't print all the sources because it would have taken a lot of pages, but we're gonna bring the Maharal. The Maharal lived mostly in the city of Prague from the mid 1500s to the beginning of the 1600s. Very famous halachic ruler and leader of the Jewish people in his time, and also a philosopher, a Jewish thought thinker, if you will. Okay, so he has a book called Netzach Yisrael, which discusses about Mashiach and the destruction of the temple and the building of the temple. So he discusses this Gemara here. He asks these two questions. Number one, what's Kamsa's problem? Why does the Talmud say Kamsa was complicit in this? And number two, he asks how come this is brought as an example for baseless hatred of destroying the temple. It's a small story of two individuals. Why did it spiral out of control? So he says like this: you can't understand this story merely in the literal sense. There is really two things going on over here. There are two archetypes of enemies that people could have. There is a Kamsa enemy and a Bar Kamsa enemy. So he wants to say is that don't look at these as being absolutely names of two different people. The Gemara is telling you, alluding to the fact that there are two types of fights people can get into: a Kamsa fight and a Bar Kamsa fight. What are those two? So he explains. Kamsa can mean to divide or to take away from. Like you have, the word he wants to bring is, there's a certain type of ritual act that the Kohen used to do in the temple called kamitza. Kamitza is to a little bit of a difficult thing for the average person to take, but they used to have this pile of, most of the time it was fine flour. They had to take a few fingerfuls in a certain way. And that way, the process they used to do was called kamitza. So you used to take away from something. So he wants to say kamsa is an allusion for fighting, because you are dividing something. It's division. It's taking away from somebody else. So that's what he wants to say. He says kamsa is allusion in general to fighting. And there are two ways people fight. There is the direct person-to-person fight. I don't mean like physical, but I mean people get into fight with each other. There's conflict, there's discord. And then there's another type of fight. And that type of fight is where people get drafted into a fight that they have no business getting involved with. So you have two people, and they want to get allies, and it becomes, and unfortunately we see this. This is not hard to imagine, but it becomes moves beyond two people and moves on to friends and friends and families. And he thinks that is the two types of fights going on over here. Is that we have, in generally speaking, you have the Bar Kamsa fight. Bar Kamsa fight is the fight where it's person to person, two people. And then you have the regular Kamsa fight, where you make somebody a friend just to add to the fight. You want to add that friend just to add division. That, he says, is the Kamsa problem over here. So he says, that's why Kamsa is complicit over here. Don't look at Kamsa as the name of an individual. Look at Kamsa as the type of fight where you just bring people in, you make friends just to add to your side, to make that possible for you. And therefore, it's not just a personal individual fight that we're talking about of two individuals, but it was a fight that was going on in the Jewish people at the time, he says. He says Yerushalayim was meant to be designed to be a city of peace, of unity. It was there was one temple, there was one altar. That's why when the Beis HaMikdash was built, there was no more individual altars. Everybody had to go there. It was the city of the Jewish people as a whole, as a united entity. So once we had these different types of fights breaking out, that was the beginning of the end. So that is how the Maharal answers why we're saying Kamsa here, and why we're saying it's all about the greater Jewish community, because it wasn't necessarily, maybe the story happened, but it's indicative of what was going on amongst the Jewish people at the time, the different types of fights that was just tearing apart the Jewish people. So that is tree number one, to understand a little bit of, it's not just baseless hatred, but it's the types of baseless hatred that were going on. It was a hatred that people have no part of being attached to. I have nothing to do with your fight, etc. like that. It was just being stoked because people wanted to make it bigger and to make it worse, and making friends for the sake of adding to the fight. That is tree number one. Any questions on that?
Just a quick comment, it's still happening today.
That's not a question.
This is the point of what we're doing today is the lesson we learn. The lesson we learn is that, and this is what the Rabbi always said, 3 weeks. The message of 3 weeks is we have to strengthen our obviously strong, strengthen the love for each other. In other words, we learn from the mistakes of the past, and to bring back the third temple with Mashiach. That's what it takes, is the routine / random / authentic acts of kindness. Okay, now I want to move on to another commentary who lived in the 1700s, lesser known. His name was Rabbi Moshe ben Eliyahu of Lublin. He lived in the city of Lublin, but eventually he made Aliyah and went to live in Churban, and he wrote a book called Pirchei Shoshanim, which is a commentary on the Talmud. And he wrote, this is more of a technical answer, but I think it brings out the same thing. He says like this: the reason why Kamsa is mentioned in the Talmud as being part of the fight is because the enemies here was not the unnamed host and Bar Kamsa. He has an interesting way of reading the Gemara. I'm not going to get into that now because that's going way too much into the bark of the tree. We're going to keep it a little bit more further out. And he wants to say is the two enemies over here were Bar Kamsa and Kamsa. Those were the people that hated each other. The unnamed host was a friend of Kamsa. So really, though, he had no problem with Bar Kamsa. In theory, on a regular street, he probably would have said hello even, not a big deal. The problem is, though, is that he had this gathering that he invited people to, and he had thought Kamsa was going to come, but Bar Kamsa showed up instead, and he now is afraid that his friend will show up, and he doesn't want his friend to be upset. So he kicks Bar Kamsa out. Bar Kamsa gets very upset, because what kind of business is this? Nobody else is here yet, and you're going to kick me out because of something that might happen? In other words, and he's telling the host basically also in a sense, it's not your fight. It's not your fight. You don't have a problem with me. This is a similar situation to the Maharal, but he just plays around the characters differently, and he brings up the same point over here. Is that people picking a fight with somebody they themselves have a fight because of their friend's fight? That already is reaching a level that's unprecedented, that's too low, and that made him so upset. That caused him the blinding rage. So that's another issue of baseless hatred that not even, I mean, to a certain degree, every hatred is baseless, right? People don't want to make up. They'd rather be upset. But over here, it's not even your fight. It's not even, what are you doing over here? Why are you kicking me out of a party? It's not even your fight. It's your friend. It's ridiculous. So because of that baseless hatred, he says, that is why Kamsa was included in the story, because that's where the fight really was between, and that is what led to the destruction of the temple. Okay. There are much more commentaries that discuss this, but we are not going to spend too much longer. We'll do a little bit more, and we will discuss just the two things that were brought up before. Why did the rabbis not intervene? So most of the answers given are technical answers. Most of the answers say that they didn't really know what was going on. They saw an altercation. If the host throws somebody out of a thing, you're gonna rely on the host's judgment, assume that something's wrong with the person that came up, and that's what it was. So Bar Kamsa assumed that the rabbis knew everything that went on, that he was shamed publicly, and that he was willing to pay. And apparently, the commentaries want to suggest that wasn't the case. It was just another chain of the misunderstandings that happened, and that's why the rabbis didn't actually protest. Some say is the rabbis saw that this is the time, like we mentioned, that flattery was prevalent in the times of at those times. So they thought there was very much that they would be able to do at that time to get the host to refrain from throwing him out. The power of the rabbis wasn't what it once was amongst the masses. So therefore, they decided better we don't say anything than say something and be ignored. And there is one more commentary that says, I forgot. I forgot what that one says. But most of the commentary is answering a technical basis. And the last discussion of what was Rabbi Zechariah, what was going on over here. So they want to say like this. Also a little bit more technical. One answer is like this. The way it was at that time is we had a Sanhedrin. We had a court of 71 elders, and they ruled in the matters pertaining to the Jewish people, the severe matters. Now, the way it works is that when they had to take a vote count to see what everybody voted on matters of life and death, they always used to start from the lowest one, which means the least senior member of the court, until they reached the most senior member of the court. Why? Because once the most senior member of the court rules, nobody can really disagree with him. Everybody has to fall in line. So that was always the way. The B'schar ben Avaklus was the leader, which means to say in a regular vote count, something as severe as this, he would have to go last. But because of his excessive humility, he actually went first. He didn't consider himself much. So therefore he voted first, and therefore nobody was able to disagree with him in the vote count. Everybody had to fall in line, and therefore that's why everybody agreed with him. And it was not able to be changed, and that is why the excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah is what led or contributed to the destruction of the temple. Another commentary also is a little bit similar, and just says we have to understand there's thinking within the box, and that there are times that within Jewish law it mandates thinking beyond the box. You have to have a certain element of leadership to understand that not every scenario is created the same, and just because the letter of the law would dictate a certain thing, sometimes the letter of the law will also say you have to go above. And the classic example is by Pinchas. Pinchas knew that there's something going on a few weeks ago, a pretty severe issue going on. In the letter of the law, it doesn't really say much to how to rectify it. Pinchas knew that there's something beyond the letter of the law. He kind of got permission, took the leadership, and he went and did the act, and he saved the Jewish people from a plague going on and from more destruction. Same thing over here. Zechariah should have understood this is life and death. This is not something to retreat into. Well, it says the letter of the law like that, and therefore he should have been pushed into more of a leadership position to think outside the box within Jewish law to come to a conclusion like the rest of the sages. So that is a little bit of like that. That is just a little bit of the trees in this part of the Talmud. And to take it all back, I think we have a little bit of more of a vibrant color of what's going on over here. So yes, baseless hatred, but understanding that there's different types of baseless hatred. There's the direct, there's being a proxy to baseless hatred. There is understanding a time to lead. There's a time to understand that you have to make a protest, even though it's uncomfortable, and maybe it won't be listened to. Nevertheless, what's right is right sometimes, and you have to do what's uncomfortable. You have these little things that provide a more colorful picture to the forest of the story of Kamsa, Bar Kamsa. And again, the bigger forest that we have to understand and take away from is that this is a time where despite what it might look from the outside, the facade, we have to look deeper. And a little bit of a commentary here. I think there are two types. We can globally speak. Yes, all of us have to do more of Obviously Stroll, and we have to, the people that we don't know, reach out to them too. But I think also, even the people that, I think this is harder, the people that we do know, we have to kind of make a concrete resolution to those specific individuals, and closer Obviously Stroll, make amends, and have, for no excuse whatsoever, get closer, and to be able to make these times into a happy time with the ultimate coming of Mashiach and the building of the third Beis HaMikdash.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions for Rabbi Shechtman?
I realized, I wasn't thinking about it at first, but Bar Kamsa is Jewish.
Okay, so very interesting.
Yeah.
Rashi says, but when these two names first come up, he says exactly that. He says, these are names of two Jews, he says. That's what he says.
Well, the anger is so powerful. In his rage, he forgot he was Jewish. He was willing to try to destroy the entire people over one mistake.
Yeah, that's what we say. Hate.
He's also destroying himself.
Yeah.
What do you think what's going to happen?
Well, this is 1 second. So we see very clearly over here. Hatred is blind. Hatred rages. We don't think. There's no concept of rationality when there's hate, and that's, I think, why. I think to a certain degree, all hate is senseless. Since sinas chinam usually goes hand in hand. It's enough for no reason. We can't think anything. We just tell ourselves stories and narratives, and we go deeper and deeper and deeper, and we go from a personal vendetta to against the sages to against the whole entire Jewish people. That's not rational. That's possible. Go for it.
Is that a real story? Yeah, is that a real story?
Yeah, it's a real story.
What year?
So this is a good question. You ever heard of Josephus?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the Talmud, it's not.
The Talmud writes something else.
So aside from the way we had the story recorded in the Talmud, Josephus says also brings this story and says this was the direct kind of say the straw that broke the camel's back for destruction. So if destruction happened roughly between the year 68 to 70 CE, you figure a little bit before that. Yes.
Is there significance to the fact that it's the name
Is not,
comes up? That might.
so that's a question. Is that the-
Okay, great question. So a lot of the commentators pick up on this, and they want to say another angle to this fight, and they want to say the fight was between a father and a son. So it was Kamsa was the father, Bar Kamsa was the son, and then they explain that story through this unnamed host, and you know, a couple of different ways of how they angled the story with the father and son synopsis. But yes, that's also brought down in the commentaries.
Larry, I want to say what you just said. We
Yeah.
made a very important point, Misha. The fact that the host is not known seems to be not so relevant. What's relevant is council workers. The very verse says, the Talmud is showing council bar council. The fact doesn't say the Talmud is showing about Chaim and council bar council. Is the fact that big council bar council seems to be there in people. And therefore, if you don't, what happened to those could be, they were in a big fight, it could be, not like they justifying it. Seems to the council bar council, they were the cause of the whole thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's in a sense, that's why that's what the Maharal says. What he says, it's not about the guy. It's about the guy.
But that was his explaining.
One question was.
No, no, just say it.
Destruction was because of selfishness of Jewish people. That's the main reason why it is struck. And it continued till now. We both selfish. A lot of Shulman.
L'chaim.